Hey guys, so like I mentioned earlier, we're going to talk about the first tentative SAT techniques today. Now, I put a do now on the screen here. Let me be really clear. I don't want you to actually do the do now, okay? Just pretend like I asked you to do this in class. Pretend like I threw this up on the board and I said, read the following passage, be prepared to discuss, and to give you like 3 or 4 minutes to do this. Honestly, even just eyeballing this looks exhausting. Now, if you want to actually pause the video and try to read it, be my guest. If not, keep going. So honestly, I'm sure most of you tried to actually read it. This is probably what's going through your head right now. I'm gonna be honest. I didn't really like typing this out, and honestly, I don't really enjoy reading it myself either. That being said, it does bring up an interesting point. If I asked you why don't you want to read this, some of you guys might say, "Oh, it's super long." Relatively speaking, anyways, it's a slide. Or some of you might say, "Oh man, it's super boring. I don't want to read this." And you're not wrong. And believe it or not, that's actually the point. All right, now let's be real here. On the SAT, you really don't want to read passages like this, especially if they're long passages. There are two main reasons why you don't want to do this. First, and this one's obvious, but also sounds a little silly, reading passages like this will bore you on the test. Now, some of you might be thinking, well, it's a test, it's kind of hard not to be bored. But hear me out. Like I told you guys last time, the SAT is a business. College Board is a business. They want you to take the test over and over again. They want you to buy SAT books and take SAT prep courses so that they make money. And obviously, they want you to get into college and they want you to do well, but they're a business at the same time. It's not an accident that the SAT picks long, difficult, and frankly boring passages to read on the test. It's kind of designed to the sense of, man, this is hard, and by being super hard, it's not really going to be that interesting. Now, sometimes you're going to be lucky and you'll get actually interesting passages in the test to read, but you're not going to be that lucky most of the time. And when you're bored, I don't have to tell you that it helps you, or rather, it hurts you, and it doesn't really help you focus all that much. Now, the second big reason that you want to be careful about this is because you have very limited time of the test. Now, I mapped out the relative time span last video. The test overall is about 3 hours. The reading sections are about 65 minutes. You have 52 questions altogether. That sounds like a lot of time for reading questions, but really think about it for a second. If you take 65 minutes and you divide it by 52 questions, you get just over a minute for each question. Some questions are really easy, you don't have to worry about, but that's a lot of time, all things considered. Let's say there are 10 questions that you can solve under a minute. Great, that's super easy. But let's say there are 20 to 30 questions that take you at least 2 minutes to solve. And when you're thinking about that, you're going to miss several questions if you take the entire 2, 3, or let's be honest, sometimes 5 minutes to answer a small section of questions. So you don't necessarily want to read whole passages. So the strategy I'm going to teach you today is a very tried, tested, and effective method for answering and reading, or should I say reading comprehension sections of the SAT. Now let me be really clear here. It's not the only way to do this, and there might be other ways that work better for certain people, but this is an effective way I'm going to teach you. The easy way to remember this is PSA, public service announcement. You're going to do 3 things. You're going to prioritize, you're going to summarize, you're going to analyze. And I'm going to break down each of the 3 steps today. Okay, the first part of the strategy relates to time. Now, I'm sure a lot of you are thinking, oh man, after that last slide, it's clear I don't have a lot of time in the reading sections. Technically, that's true. I'm going to teach you guys when you should decide to read the whole passage or when you should decide to do different things with the passages. But there are a couple other decisions you have to make, and they relate to this. The SAT is kind of weird in terms of how it's scored. You obviously get questions right, and by getting questions right, you get points. And if you get a question wrong by trying the question and getting an incorrect answer, you lose points. Now, here's the thing not everyone knows for the SAT. If you skip a question, you don't technically lose any points in the SAT. You simply just don't get any points. Now, that might sound bad. Obviously, you want to get as many points as you can, but sometimes it's helpful to think about and realize, you know what? Maybe I don't want to try to answer this question because, you know what, I might lose the point. Sometimes getting no points is better than trying and losing points, especially if the question that you are spending time on to consider this is a long, difficult question. Now, before I keep going, I'll throw an analogy your way so we all understand. Let's say I told you, okay, we're going to go to a basketball hoop. I'm going to give you a basketball, and I'm going to give you 1 minute. And you have 1 minute to try to make 10 shots. You have to make at least 10 shots, or 10 attempts. For every shot you make that you get in, I'm going to give you $100. Now, for every shot that you miss, I'm going to deduct $50 from your score. If we end the minute and you are in the negative, you owe me money. Now, some of you who might be good at basketball might be thinking, all right, this is my time to make money from Mr. Kim. All right, let's do this. Some of you guys might be thinking, you know what, this is going to be challenging. I only have 1 minute and I have to try it 10 times. I just don't know. Now, if you look at this analogy and think, oh man, it's either I'm going to make money or I'm going to lose money for each shot, then this whole thing becomes really, really stressful. But that's not how the SAT works. The SAT is more like a system in which you have the 10 shots and you have the minute, but instead of $50, you only lose $25 for each shot that you miss. Or you can alternatively choose to skip a shot if you don't want to do it. Let's say I said for this different scenario, instead of the 10 shots in the same place, you have different shots from different places that are further and further away from the basket. Because the SAT has questions of varying difficulty. It's not one uniform kind of difficulty all throughout. Now, some people like to say, well, the SAT is just difficult in general, and it's not an easy test, I grant you. But there are ways in which you can see where the easy questions are in a section, where the easy questions aren't, and which ones you should attempt. Because again, you don't lose points for skipping questions. So, for example, I pulled this off an actual SAT book. Let's say you get a passage this long. Now, if you get a passage this long, honestly, I recommend you read it. And really read the whole thing. Now, if it takes you more than for this 2 minutes to read, I'd kind of just do the thing I'm going to teach you in a second. But this is not a long passage. It's just easy enough to understand. It's a short paragraph, and it's only based on 2 questions. Now, here's the thing. I'm going to be honest. Most times in the SAT, you're not going to get passages this short. Most times in the SAT, you're going to get passages this long. And frankly, probably even longer, probably at least 2 or 3 times this length. And that's really normal on the SAT. And I'm going to be honest, you probably should not read this whole thing. Now, I told you before that the SAT likes to pick out things that are generally boring, and this is true. Now, I'm scaling over this, and I'm an English teacher, I'm going to be honest. I don't find it very interesting. Now, some people might say, you know what? I do think this is interesting. But that's also a trap. Sometimes the SAT, and this is really devious, sometimes the SAT gives you really interesting passages, and you forget you're in a test, and you're like, all right, I'm going to read it, and as you read it, you think to yourself, you know what, that's kind of interesting. This story is about, Native American stories, and Porcupine Moment, okay, so it's fictional, and then you go through it, and like, man, I really enjoyed that story. And then you look up at the clock, and you realize you spent 10 minutes reading this story. Now, I'm not saying reading a story is bad if you can do it quickly, but if you spend 10 minutes on this, that's way too much time. You need to prioritize, because you don't have a lot of time. Now, this next section of the strategy is probably the most important section. So, like I showed you in the short passage, if the passage is short, maybe you should read it. If you think to yourself, you know what, I can read this in a minute or 2 tops, read it. But again, you're more likely going to get long passages. If the passage is long, definitely skim it, even if you think it's interesting. And when I say skim it, I mean go through the passage, and on the test, because you can physically write on the test these days, you should take your pencil and underline keywords, or words that look important, or words that repeat. This is kind of similar to close reading. If you guys remember through close reading, one of the things I asked you guys to pay attention to were things that repeat or react to things that seem important. A lot of you guys weren't really sure why I did this. One of the reasons I had you do close reading all year was to help you prepare for this portion of the strategy, in order for you guys to train the muscle to read things and react to things and say, you know what, this thing is important, or this theme seems significant, or even for some of the people who said, I don't get this part. Sometimes you don't get it because it's not important. Sometimes it is important, but it's overly complicated, so maybe you should spend more time on that portion than another portion that seems really easy. So you're going to go skim it. You shouldn't spend a lot of time, but you should go through more or less and try to get the big picture, try to get the main idea, try to get enough keywords or important phrases to summarize the information that you have a working knowledge of the passage, of the reading, to answer the questions. I'm going to demonstrate what this looks like in a second. I'm going to remind you to prioritize, even if you think the passage is not boring. And I'm going to remind you can always go back and read things or check out certain lines and passages if you need to. So, for example, I picked a blurb from a test that is actually potentially interesting. If you just scan over this passage, it talks about Netflix. Most people I know like Netflix, and most people might be kind of interested to read this. Now, this is really short, honestly, and this one you can probably read really quickly, but let's say this one was page and a half long. Even if it's interesting, you can run into the trap of, oh man, I didn't know Netflix did this. And then you look up and 15 minutes have gone by. That is not good. Please make sure to prioritize. Now, again, if it's something this short, I probably could read it, but I am trying to demonstrate to you how to use the summarization technique on the SAT, because some of it involves the skills you've been building up through close reading. Some of it is time-based, so we have to be careful here. So, going off the strategy I'm trying to cover here, instead of reading this whole thing, what you're going to do is you're going to scan it and you're going to pick out words that seem important. Now, I'm looking through this and I'm not really reading it. I'm just kind of reading it really quickly. I'm seeing Netflix. All right, so obviously the passage about Netflix. I am seeing successful, success, for life, not concerned, hard work, concerned with results, even though, excellent job, for fired. Now, I slowed down on that for you guys, and that took maybe like 45 seconds. But if you do this on your own, that's like 15 seconds of the important content for this paragraph. And honestly, I don't think I'm wrong. The words I picked out, the key ideas I picked out, they seemed easy enough to understand. And just so you guys don't lose track of this, I'm going to try to highlight this. Full disclosure, I'm not sure if this is going to work, so please bear with me. But I'm going to try to highlight this. I don't know if this is going to highlight at the rate I'm doing this, but if not, we'll see what happens. Okay, so I'm highlighting Netflix. Netflix. So one thing that, and again, in real time, this will take me like 15 seconds, but I'm going to explain it to you so that slows down the time we have. When you see words repeat on the SAT, that's generally an indication that it's really, really important. Words that either repeat or mean more or less the same thing, or are similar. They have some correlation. So I'm seeing Netflix, successful. I'm seeing success. I wrote down for life because there are quotation marks. I wrote down hard work because there are quotation marks. I wrote down concern with results. Now, I see results is italicized. There's probably some big emphasis on results, so I'm highlighting it. Also, and I'm making this connection as I'm going through this, successful, success, results, hard work, these things all seem like they have some correlation together. I'm going to keep going. I don't think I need to highlight Netflix, but I'm pretty clear that it's Netflix again. I see Amazon. I might highlight that here for a second. Excellent job. Fired as soon as they weren't needed. Now, again, I haven't read the entire passage, but I think I generally have more or less the idea of what I need just by going through really quickly and highlighting or underlining or picking out words and terms that seem important. Now, this is really important. You should not summarize too much. Now, frankly, I am doing this with you guys in the comfort of my own home and computer. I'm not under a specific time crunch, so I'm not really hurting myself by going through this. But on the actual test, you are going to need to speed up a little bit And here's the thing. This technique is very good for the SAT. You really should not read entire passages. But also at the same time, you don't want to over-summarize. If you over-summarize, you pick up too many pieces of information, and then the process becomes counterproductive. Keep in mind, not everything in a passage is relevant to the questions. So one of the reasons you don't want to read an entire passage is because sometimes several paragraphs don't matter to the questions, and you need to answer the questions, otherwise why are you reading the passage? More than that, some information looks counterproductive. It looks like it contradicts the main idea. And if you go through each line bit by bit by bit by bit by bit, and you try to pick out one thing from each line, that's not going to work. Honestly, you should try to pick out a couple of things from each paragraph, because most of the passages have different chunks in paragraphs. Now for this one, I'm not going to ask you to read it, but by going through the same strategy, I'm going to go ahead and highlight this. And again, I don't know if this is going to highlight in real time as I'm talking. It may have actually just popped up, and it may just be on the screen as we're going through. I don't know how this is going to work, so please bear with me. But I am in my computer screen, I'm doing this in real time. So I'm going through this. I'm going to highlight world trade. Okay, countries. I see products, spice, silks, tea, Elizabeth, Queen Elizabeth, gold, roots, Panama Canal, significant change, economists, trend, Caribbean diplomacy, food products, international politics. Okay, now I apologize for how messy that looks. I'm sorry. Now again, I took time to tell you guys what I'm highlighting, and frankly, I picked a little more than I normally would have picked. But the things I pick more or less tell me what I need to know. So I'm going through each of the worlds. I see world trade, I see countries, I see products. So something about countries trading products, right? Super simple. I see spice, maybe things that they're trading, silks and tea, Queen Elizabeth, gold, root, Panama Canal. It's just specifics, and I'm looking at some of the proper nouns, but I'm not hitting all of them. And if I need to refer to a specific one, I can go back. That's totally fine. Panama Canal, significant economic change, economist, trend, diplomacy, food products, international politics, unconnected. So I know from the words I picked out, it's about world trade. It's about countries trading products. It's about relationship between countries. I see things like Queen Elizabeth and Panama Canal and Caribbean diplomacy. So I have a general idea of what's happening. I might not know the specifics of what's happening, but more often than not, you don't always need to know. You just need to have a general idea, especially because some questions only ask you about general ideas or general focuses in passages. Now, this is really important. If a passage consists of several paragraphs, it is imperative to go paragraph by paragraph. Now, I've had students in the past that say, you know what, I don't want to do this paragraph by paragraph. It seems like a lot. I'm just going to go through it really quickly and speed through it. That works for some people. Don't get me wrong. It doesn't work for everyone. Some people try to do the whole thing, and they get really exhausted and overwhelmed. Because they're like, oh, man, what is the connection between all these different ideas? And the reason for that is because the SAT picks passages where each different paragraph in the passage generally has some main idea. Now, they're all relatively connected because they're part of the same passage, but you should want to go paragraph by paragraph, because there's usually a main idea by each paragraph. In fact, I'm going to go ahead and tell you this. If a passage has several paragraphs, try to write in the margins next to the small paragraph like a main idea, like one or two words, like what is this about? What is this about? What is this about? That really helps you organize the information. When you go back and try to answer the questions, and they ask for specific things, or they ask, how does the author talk about this idea, but they don't give you a specific paragraph? Well, if you've annotated the paragraphs, or if you've written the main idea next to each paragraph, you can look through the reading again that you've written on and just go back to that paragraph and go through it again. Now, here's the last portion of the strategy. It's to analyze what you have to do. I've alluded to this as we've gone along, but after you prioritize your time, you make a decision, and after you summarize the passages, not read the passages, not overanalyze the passages, summarize the passages, you need to look at the questions and look at the answers. You have to see what the question is asking you to do, where the question is asking you to look, and this is really important. Pay attention to the wording. The SAT likes to throw questions and answers that are phrased in such a way that they're kind of tricky. They ask you general idea things, but then they'll throw in a specific word, more or less kind of like what is the general idea that he is most likely to say? And then they'll throw a couple different options at you, and some of them look good, but some people miss the most likely and they don't pick the best answer. I'm going to actually go into how the SAT likes to trap and trick you on Thursday's lesson, but for now, pay attention to wording and see what the question is specifically asking. We're going to dive into this a little later. I will say this for now, though. Some people, instead of skimming through the passages first, they like to look at the questions and read the questions and go back to the reading next. I'm not going to say you can't do that. I certainly know people who have had success stories with doing that. Frankly, it's kind of a to each their own type thing. Personally, I didn't really work well with that strategy because whenever I would look at the questions first, I would go into the reading almost looking for certain things, and some questions that worked. Other questions I got so hung up on finding a specific piece of information that I kind of burnt myself out, and I couldn't read the whole thing, and I couldn't even summarize the whole thing properly. So again, to each their own, just be careful. But I do recommend that you prioritize first, summarize next, and go over the questions and analyze and see what you're looking at. Go back to the specific parts, because again, you don't need everything in the passage. Unfortunate, but it's true. Now, is this method perfect? Absolutely not. There are certain things that are going to work differently for everyone else. A couple ways to help mitigate the margins of error. Try context clues. They're very, very important. See how the word's being used, especially because a lot of questions will ask, look at line 45 and tell me what this word most correctly or most exactly means based on the context. Again, there are other methods. I'm definitely not going to tell you that this is the only method, but find the one that works best for you. Now, if we try this together, I pull the same passage, and unfortunately I can't highlight the same things, but I have a general idea here. Okay, now, by going through the general idea, I can look at the question. So I've prioritized the passage, and let's pretend for a second that the passage was part of something longer. I summarized it very briefly, and collectively this would have taken me 15-20 seconds, and now I'm going to look at the question. According to the author, Netflix's primary concern is, okay, so we have 5 answers, and I'm going to go through each of them with you. Well, if you want to try to solve this on your own, pause the video right now, try to work on this, and then when you're ready to see the correct answer, come back. So if you want to pause, and then come back. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and tell you that the correct answer to this question is actually E. Some of you guys looking through this might have said A, and I totally understand that. But let's go through each answer and see whether or not correct. But for now, I'm going to say that of the 5 here, A and E are the ones that look the best. So let's hold off A and E for now. I'm going to break down B, C, and D. Sorry, I've been talking for a long time. So, B says, to make sure employees don't think of the job as the one they will keep for life. Now, and I will really break down on how the SAT throws trap answers at you. If you look at this, if you go back in the passage, you might see, the exact phrase, keep for life. You might think, oh, this is the one. But you have to make sure you analyze the question and see the specific wording. The specific wording here is primary concern. I don't think with the words I highlighted, and if you need to go back, but in the words I highlighted, I really picked out a big thing with for life. There doesn't seem to be a repetitive emphasis on for life. So maybe it's one of their concerns. It's not their primary concern. So we're going to cancel out B. C says to have employees that will come to work on time, stay late, and show loyalty to the company. I'm seeing things like success, results, success, results, fired, weren't needed. I don't think the emphasis is on work on time and stay late, and loyalty to the company. I think it's about success and results. D, ensure customer satisfaction. This is one of those answers that looks nice and sounds good and is a common sense answer, but there's no evidence in the passage. If there's no evidence in the passage for the question, I can't guarantee that you should pick that answer. So D is not the correct answer. So we have A and E to keep their massive level of success and to have relatively successful results. Now, if you picked A, I don't really blame you. A looks good too, but I guarantee you the answer is E, because we're looking here at primary concern. Now, if we see the number of times success is used in the passage, successful, success, and we have successful going down towards the end of the passage, some people like to say, you know what, it's success, totally success. But we're looking for main ideas. In addition to success, I also looked at the word results here. Now, if you remember, results is italicized. When a passage goes out of its way to italicize something, or capitalize something, or underline something, it probably means that is really, really important. So success is definitely important, and there is, some, admission on Netflix being quite successful. We need to have a whole big picture thing. And I see success, and emphasis on results. So E is the best answer here, to have relatively successful results. And honestly, if you don't believe me, read the passage and tell me I'm wrong. The answer here is E. Okay, so here's your assignment. I'm going to be honest. Initially, I was going to give you a reading comprehension section with questions, and eventually I will do that. But honestly, I don't want you guys to get overly discouraged by the questions and you trying them, and you getting discouraged by you not getting questions right, or not worrying about the number. And also, frankly, I know some of you are probably not going to honestly try the questions and may cheat or just guess. And I don't want you guys to do that. So I want you guys just to practice the reading and summarizing and sections and strategies. So I have posted 2 readings in Classroom. I want you to refer to the 2 readings I posted in Classroom. For each reading, this is what you're going to do. First, I want you to go through the text, and I want you to try to summarize the content by doing what I did in this video. Paragraph by paragraph, I want you to briefly highlight or underline or just write down separately the words and the terms that seem important. And for each paragraph, I want you to write down what you feel is the main idea in a couple of words. You could do it in a sentence if you want. If you want to do it in 1 or 2 words, that's fine with me. I want you to try to do this timed. Try to keep this at no more than 5 minutes. And then second, I want you to thoroughly reread the passages, the entire passage that you just worked on, to see if you got this closely or if your main idea was a little different. And then I want you to write down how close you were, or like what parts you got correct, what parts you didn't get correct. And I want you to do this for both readings, and I want you to submit this via document in the classroom assignment by Wednesday night. Now, let me be really clear here. When you try this at first, you may not get this completely down the first couple of times. This is something you have to practice. This is a muscle you have to build. If it helps, think of it like close reading on steroids. If close reading was done within the span of 10 minutes and I asked you to speed things up and worry about question results. This is a challenging technique. I'm not going to lie, but if you master this technique, you will do much better in the SAT. And I want to try this before we even get to questions. And I will have a lesson on questions on Thursday. We're going to talk about the different tricks the SAT throws at you for questions. But for now, read both passages, and for each passage, use the summarization techniques, and then I want you to check the actual passage, see how close you are, and then just write down a little blurb about how close you got. Okay? All right, if you have any questions, please let me know. You may email me. You can reach out to me for a separate private Google Meet, and I will post a meeting link tomorrow in Classroom from 12 to 1. Okay, thanks. Bye.